Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Wisconsin Book Festival Fall Celebration. My name is Connor Moran. I'm the director of the Wisconsin Book Festival, and I am delighted this evening to be joined by Kiley Reid, Angie Kim, and Dantiel Moniz. This is one of those special events that just kind of comes together and feels so wonderful, and then you just watch accolades roll in and friendships that you didn't know existed. So we are absolutely delighted to be able to host this event tonight. I want to take a moment at the beginning to thank Madison Public Library and the Madison Public Library Foundation. Their support of free cultural events for the last 8 years, but also throughout the pandemic has been just unwavering, and it has always been their top priority to make sure that we have cultural evenings like tonight to take part in, whether we're here at home or live at Madison Central Library. So thank you for joining us for the Wisconsin Book Festival this year. I just wanted to say Kiley Reid's book, Such a Fun Age, and Angie Kim's book, Miracle Creek, are amazing debuts. And I also wanted to mention, I just got this in the mail today, Dantiel's debut is going to come out in February, so please look for Milk Blood Heat from Grove Press. I will let the authors do the talking now, and I'll see you at the end. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. I am so happy to be here with these two debut authors. We've got a great conversation in store for you all today. I'm going to get started introducing them, and then we'll get going. So Angie Kim is the debut author of the international bestseller and Edgar Winter Miracle Creek, named a Best Book of the Year by Time, The Washington Post, Kirkus, and The Today Show, among others. A Korean immigrant, former editor of the Harvard Law Review, and one of Variety Magazine's 10 Storytellers to Watch, Kim has written for Vogue, the New York Times Book Review, the Washington Post, Glamour, and numerous literary journals. She lives in Northern Virginia with her husband and 3 sons. Welcome, Angie.
Thank you.
And Kiley Reid is a recent graduate of the Iowa's Writers Workshop, where she was the recipient of the Truman Capote Fellowship. Her writing has been featured or is forthcoming in the New York Times, Playboy, Plowshares, December, New South, and Lumina. Her New York Times bestselling debut, Such a Fun Age, is currently in development by Lena Waithe's Hillman Grad Productions and Sight Unseen Pictures, and was longlisted for the Booker Prize. Kiley lives in Philadelphia. Welcome, Kiley.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So when I first accepted the opportunity to moderate this panel, I was really interested to see how the festival thought your two books might be in conversation with each other, because especially if you're just reading the copy, they seem like totally disparate books. So Kiley's novel follows a 25-year-old babysitter navigating the terrain of becoming a real adult. And Angie's deals with the aftermath of an experimental medical treatment gone wrong that ends in the deaths of a mother and child. So, I was reading the two copies and I was like, okay, I guess we'll see. But I was really pleased once I read them to see how much crossover there was between the books. And that's what we're going to get into tonight. But before we get started, I'm going to have Kiley and Angie read a little bit from both of their novels. So whichever one of you wants to go first.
I'll go.
Okay. Yeah.
We're ready. Okay.
Right.
I'm just going to read a tiny little bit. I like to drop you right in. So here we go. Sometimes, when she was particularly broke, Amira convinced herself that if she had a real job, a 9-to-5 position with benefits and decent pay, then the rest of her life would start to resemble adulthood as well. She'd do things like make her bed in the morning, and she'd learn to start liking coffee. She wouldn't sit on the floor in her bedroom discovering new music and creating playlists until 3 a.m., only to put herself to bed and think, why do you do this to yourself? She'd try out a new dating app, and she'd have more interesting interests to write about, activities other than hanging out with Zara, watching old music videos, painting her nails, and eating the same dinner at least 4 nights a week, a crock pot meal consisting of shredded chicken, salsa, and cheese. If Amira had a real job, she'd look at her wardrobe full of clothes from Strawberry and Forever 21, and she'd decide it was past time for an upgrade. Amira constantly tried to convince herself that she could find another child, a little girl with nice parents who needed her full time. They'd keep her on the books, and she could say she paid taxes. They'd take her on vacations and consider her part of the family. But when Amira saw other children, anyone who wasn't Briar Chamberlain, she felt viscerally disgusted. They had nothing interesting to say. Their eyes had dead, creepy stares, and they were modest in a way that seemed weirdly rehearsed. Amira often watched Briar approach other toddlers on swings and slides, and they turn away from her saying, "No, I'm shy." Other children were easy audiences who loved receiving stickers and hand stamps, whereas Briar was always at the edge of a tiny existential crisis. Underneath her constant chatter, Briar was messy and panicky and thoughtful, constantly struggling with demons of propriety. She liked things that had mint smells, she didn't like loud noises, and she didn't consider hugging a legitimate form of affection unless she could lay her head against a welcoming shoulder. Most of their evenings ended with Amira paging through a magazine while Briar played in the bathtub. Briar sat with her toes in her hands, her face a civil war of emotions, singing songs and trying to whistle. She'd have private conversations with herself, and Amira often heard her explain to the voices in her head, "No, Amira is my friend. She's my special friend." Amira knew she had to find a new job.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to read from the first page of the novel. The Incident, Miracle Creek, Virginia, August 26, 2008. My husband asked me to lie. Not a big lie. He probably didn't even consider it a lie, and neither did I at first. It was such a small thing what he wanted. The police had just released the protesters, and while he stepped out to make sure they weren't coming back, I was to sit in his chair, cover for him, the way coworkers do as a matter of course, the way we ourselves used to at the grocery store, while I ate or he smoked. But as I took his seat, I bumped against the desk, and the certificate above it went slightly crooked, as if to remind me that this wasn't a regular business, that there was a reason he'd never left me in charge before. Hawk reached over me to straighten the frame, his eyes on the English lettering. Hawk U, Miracle Submarine LLC, Certified Hyperbaric Technician. He said, eyes still on the certificate as if talking to it, not to me. Everything's done. The patients are sealed in. The oxygen's on. You just have to sit here. He looked at me. That's it. I looked over the controls, the unfamiliar knobs and switches for the chamber we'd painted baby blue and placed in this barn just last month. What if the patients buzz me? I said. I'll say you'll be right back, but if something goes wrong and... Wrong? What could go wrong? Hawk said, his voice forceful like a command. I'll be right back and they won't buzz you. Nothing will happen. He walked away as if that was the end of the matter. But at the doorway, he looked back at me. Nothing will happen, he said again, softer. It sounded like a plea. As soon as the barn door banged shut, I wanted to scream that he was crazy to expect nothing to go wrong on this day, of all days, when so much had gone wrong. The protesters, their sabotage plan, the resulting power outage, the police. Did he think so much had already happened that nothing more could? But life doesn't work like that. Tragedies don't inoculate you against further tragedies, and misfortune doesn't get sprinkled out in fair proportions. Bad things get hurled at you in clumps and batches, unmanageable and messy. How could he not know that after everything we'd been through?
Yay, thank you so much. Okay, so that's just to give you a little taste of what these books are kind of going to navigate if you haven't read them yet. But when I first come to a new book, the question that I have in my mind for the author is, which came first, the characters or the story?
I'm gonna make Angie take it first.
Okay, so I think for me it was a little bit more of the place and this thing. This is this hyperbaric oxygen therapy chamber, this so-called miracle submarine. So it's actually a thing that I did, this being my debut novel. I probably drew a little more from my own life than I would, maybe for other novels or something like that. But I did this crazy experimental medical chamber thing with one of my kids. I have 3 boys and all 3 are fine now, but they all had medical issues when they were babies. And so one of the things that I did was this bizarre thing for an ulcerative colitis when he was 4 years old. And the first time we saw it, he pointed to it and he said, look, it's a submarine, because it looked like the Beatles' Yellow Submarine, which we had just watched for family movie night, and except that it was blue instead of yellow. So we called it our blue submarine. And you're sealed in with other families, and the kids who are inside have, you know, disabilities and medical issues of various types. And you do this for 40 dives or 1-hour sessions throughout the summer, like every day. And so it becomes, in a real way, a crucible. And so to me, it was just the perfect way to explore a whole bunch of people who are sort of having to deal with each other and deal with all of the circumstances that arise from the anxieties of being sealed in this place, especially if something goes wrong. And so to me, it was more, it almost that chamber, sort of that submarine chamber, became a character in and of itself. And then sort of everything, including the characters, who are the people who would come to this kind of place, who are the Korean immigrant owners who own this thing, and what are the relationships between them, as well as what are the kinds of things that can arise out of the setting that sort of all came from that setting. So it was really, I guess neither, it was really this submarine chamber. How about you, Kiley?
That was really hard to follow up. I did not do anything cool like that. I'm really jealous of that experience. So I think that in the same way, it's a little bit shifted. It's people, but for me, it was more of the relationship between them. I knew that from the beginning that I wanted to tell an awkward relationship between 3 people. And I got lucky in that I had 2 of those types of relationships. I always start with characters. The people are, it's kind of like when you pick a job and you're like, you have to try and like the people you work with if you're lucky enough to make that decision. Whether, you know, they have a lot of flaws or not a lot, you have to be interested in them. And so that was the most important thing. So I started off with knowing I wanted a young woman who's figuring out her life, her employer who doesn't really understand boundaries, and then a new boyfriend. And that was one 3-way relationship. And the other one I knew that I wanted, which presented itself to me so easily with that kind of domestic work, as it does for hundreds of years now, is a Black woman, a white mother, and then a white child she's taking care of. And so there's something really magical with 3s, and alliances are constantly shifting. And I had the most fun with Amira, Breyer, and Alex, as you know, with a 3-year-old, alliances are shifting all the time. So it's just who she likes more in that moment. And so I think that 3 creates a really nice story. It creates really nice unbalance as well. And I have to say, like, a lot of my favorite movies do that really well, from really brilliant movies like Moonlight that had a son, an addict mother, and a new mentor, to, oh my gosh, what is that movie? I just watched it recently and it holds up so well. Julia Roberts, Rupert Everett,
that's My Best Friend's Wedding.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, oh, that's so fun. Yeah,
really good. So from very serious movies to rom-coms, I think that everyone's kind of playing around with that 3, that magic number, and so that's where I started with the people.
Yeah, and what you said too about, like, you know, white women and their Black, you know, child caregivers. I was thinking a lot, there were lines in your story that made me think of like The Help, and then like Little Fires Everywhere, where it's like, I want to, you know, your family, but it's not really like that with, you know, transactional relationships. So Kiley, your novel bounces between Amira's point of view and Alex's point of view to tell this story. And Angie, yours has like a large cast of characters that are in this trial format. It's like 7 main characters that are kind of, that we get to be in their heads for a little while listening to this story unfolding. So my question is, what are the challenges of creating a narrative that's based on multiple viewpoints, and how did you navigate jumping from head to head to tell these stories?
I mean, Angie, I don't know about you. Sometimes I would write a scene from one character's perspective, and I felt like writing it from that perspective made me know that I shouldn't be doing it from that perspective, and I needed to do it from the other. And so I feel like, you know, when I first started taking writing more seriously, I took one of those classes at like Sackett Writers Workshop, and I was living in New York City, and my teacher, Ted Thompson, who was wonderful, always talked about, when you're reading something, your brain just goes, who is most important? What's their problem? Why is their problem interesting? And then when you have multiple perspectives, it's really just figuring out who's the most interesting person to hear about that perspective from. And so there was a lot of trial and error. And that's when I feel like listening to what the story wants from you is really important. Like as much as you plot it out, you have to listen to what the story needs. And I think a perfect example of that is there's my probably favorite scene at the end of the novel is the scene where Alex goes to Amira's apartment. Because for probably 2 years, I had imagined that conversation happening in the Chamberlain house. But then at that moment, I was like, wait, she would never leave her house. I can't do that. How am I going to make this work? And so in making it work, it was a really ripe opportunity to show Amira's home through her employer. And that was, a fun group text of me sending it to my girlfriends being like, okay, what are those items you have in college that you take with you to your first apartment? And it was just a really rich opportunity. And so I feel like it's a lot of trial and error. And people always ask too, like, oh, are you in one person's perspective one day? Are you in someone else the next day? I feel like it's a combination. Yeah. I don't know about you, Angie.
Yeah, so that's so fascinating. I love that. Because I remember that scene that you're talking about, and I really did love how you made that switch. So for me, yeah, I have 7 POV characters, which I did not intend to have. I thought there would be like 4, and the excerpt that I read is first person, which is sort of almost like the prologue. It's the incident. But the rest of the novel happens over the 4-day murder trial. And that is, and those are all in close third. And so I was never a writer. So I'm really late. I came to writing very late. In my 40s, I started writing. And also I'm a Korean immigrant. So I didn't even, like when I was a teenager and things, I was learning English. So I think I just had I was always an avid reader, but I never really thought of myself as a writer. But what I was in high school, especially in college too, I was a drama person. I was in theater, and so I probably did like 4 or 5 hours of serious like method acting, improv type stuff every day, because I was a theater major. And so I feel like I brought that to writing. And so the way that I write, I didn't plot it out, even though it's a mystery, which is really ridiculous and not something I recommend in any way whatsoever. But I sort of did it as I wrote one chapter at a time. So I would write one chapter from one character's perspective and then move to a different character. And yeah, I just got the sense that like, okay, this is the end of that scene. And really, I'm now curious what this other character was doing during that scene. What were they thinking of, and how are they going to be reacting? So it just sort of seemed like a nice natural segue. But I thought it was really inefficient from a writing perspective, because every time I switched chapters and characters, then I would have to spend like another week or so trying to get into that character's voice and their head and trying to figure out what were they doing the last 2 chapters or 3 chapters or whatever. So I feel like it took me so much longer than if I'd had like a nice outline in the beginning and I knew what the plot was, and I could have like written all of the Mary chapters, in one fell swoop, and then gotten that voice nice and consistent, and then like done the same thing with, the male characters and whatever. But unfortunately, I just didn't know enough about the story until sort of I got to those points, and that was really the only way that I could do it. And so I sort of like told myself, oh, like I'm sort of doing this method writing type of thing, and I'm getting into the character. And
I mean, you have to, right? There's a certain point of embodiment that we as writers have to do in order to make our characters 3-dimensional on the page, because there's like nothing worse than reading for pages and pages about like a flat like character. But I thought both of you did that very well. And I also love that, you're talking about different perspectives, but I love to see the same situation, the same memory as told by the 2 characters, like from their viewpoint, because what you see, and what somebody else sees of the same situation can be entirely different, even though you're both at the same time. So another thing I'm really interested in talking about, in both of your novels, there's a thread of mothers and their discontent with their children, right? We see it between Alex and Briar, and between Elizabeth and Henry, and even Young and Mary, right? There's like there's a lot of tension and friction there. We also see the success of each mother in an economic sense kind of being dependent on them being away from their child. So what do you think this says about what a society expects from a mother, and in turn what their children come to expect?
There's so much going on there. Yes. You know, the mother in my novel, she has just moved to Philadelphia. She feels like she's kind of ripped from everything that she knows. She feels like a bit of an expat, and she's lonely. She, there's no conversation between her and her husband about who's doing childcare. It's just kind of like, that's
it's like, that's you.
That's it. And I think that it's her loneliness. It's a little bit of coincidence. It's a lot of things that drive her to make a lot of really bad decisions. But I think it's a little bit all too easy to get on Alex for not being a really wonderful employer. On one end, I love characters who find themselves in a position of power and don't know what to do with it, because I think it's really interesting. On another end, it's really unfair to Alex. The thing is, if we lived in a perfect world, Alex should not have to deal with, there's this woman who depends on me for healthcare. That's really scary to me. Even if Alex had been the most perfect employer, that still makes her responsible for this young woman's healthcare. And Alex is nosy. She checks out Amira's text messages,
and she snoops.
She's really lonely, and she snoops. She thinks Amira's cool. She's also really lonely, and so she looks through text messages. And I can't help but think, what if things had worked out and Amira was her full-time nanny and she was giving her healthcare and everything worked out? If she had seen a text message where Amira was kind of talking shit about her, as we've all done, then that's the difference between her being able to go to the doctor and not. And I think that's really, really difficult and scary. I believe that childcare should be subsidized in that way, some way. It is in many, many countries. And so I think instead of firing all of my energy on how many mistakes Alex makes, which is many, I'd rather save that for the systems that she's brought into. I don't think it's easy, and I can't imagine writing a book, being a mother of two, being an employer. That's all not easy for her. Yeah.
I love that. I love those aspects of your novel too. And because this is something that really, really interests me. I mean, obviously I'm a mother too. And, being a writer is like my fifth career. I'm very ADHD or something in that way. But but one of the things that I did right before becoming a writer was I was a stay-at-home mom for, like 10 years or something or longer. And so I sort of got to see the judgments that I think we have, that society sort of has, and the expectations that we have for women to be sort of these saintly, perfect mothers. And in some ways, I really wanted to have these mothers who are, having these really frank conversations with each other about what it's like to be the mother of in sort of extraordinary situations. So the mothers and really the parents who are in my novel are having to deal with the fact that they made so many sacrifices. They made sacrifices of abandoning their own families and country to sort of immigrate to the US, where they don't even speak the language. And, and then some are having to sort of give up everything and become single parents because, marriage is so hard and the divorce rates are so high when you are facing disorders like, cerebral palsy and autism and things like that. So there are those types of sort of special needs parenting and the sacrifices that are going on there. And I think even when we're dealing with difficult situations like that, we do have this expectation that mothers, unlike other types of caregivers, are expected to not only do it, but enjoy every single aspect of it. And I have a couple of scenes in my novel where the women are very frank with each other and confess to each other that they have had moments where they've had really shameful thoughts that they would never want to say out loud, where they've actually thought, what would my life be like if my child were to have died rather than surviving in this way? And I mean, even just saying that now, even though I'm talking about a fictional scene, it just sort of makes me, I have misgivings about even saying it even in this context. And so, you know, and I think it's this myth of sort of this perfect saintly mother that I would really like to sort of fight against, and, you know, sort of give each other the permission to sort of say, you're not a bad person, you're not a monster because you have these thoughts that are shameful, because, you know, that's what being human is about. But I think that it's still a taboo, even in fiction.
100%. We demonize these normal human feelings, you know, and it's definitely 100% like gender based. It's awful, but, you know, hopefully we can keep pushing back through that. Kiley, you touched on a lot of the stuff that I wanted to get into on my next question. As far as systems, I really loved how in your books, and even Angie, especially yours, when you're talking about who is responsible for the deaths of these people, that there are no black and white villains in your novels. At least I didn't come to the page saying, okay, these are, you know, like Alex is a bad person, like you were saying, because that's not how humans work 9 times out of 10. But I do think that each of your books engage with larger systems of oppression that kind of works as a built-in antagonist. So we're talking about racism, classism, you know, the difficulty of the immigration process, all of that stuff. And you touched on it, Kiley, but I wanted to know, in your depictions of these systems on the page, what would you want your readers to take away from your novels, if anything? In a perfect world, if you could control what your reader took away from a book.
This is not a cop-out, I promise. But I can't help but think of the novels that have stuck with me and really made me see things differently. And my professor from school, Paul Harding, who's wonderful, he always talked about, when you're writing, even as a fiction writer, you have to tell the truth that's so accurate that it's almost haunting and it's really uncomfortable. And I feel like those are the things that really stick with me and have a slow burn on me as I continue to walk through life. And so, you know, I'm a bit of a teenager when it comes to anyone telling me something. Like if you tell me like, don't date that person, like I'm going to date them, like that's it. Like you can't tell me anything. So when it comes to a novel, I try and leave out polemics and just stick to the people. Because like you said, there's some gray areas here. You know, there's a part where Amira is being held at a grocery store and being racially profiled, and she's nervous and she's scared and she's mad. And she says to this security guard, I'm making money right now, and I bet I'm making more than you. So like, what's up? That is a very classist thing for her to say. But to look at that and say, you're bad because that's classist, is missing the entire point. In that moment, the only thing that she has is the fact that she's making double. She's making $32 an hour, and she's scared. She's not at her best. She says the only thing that she has. And so I wanted to give all of my characters freedom to do that, so I could play with that gray area a little bit. Because if Alex said that, that'd be a different story. And so, like you said, that gray area is so important to me. If I could pick what my readers look into, it's who has the most power, who has the most capital, who has the most cultural capital, you know, and who can cause the most damage from that capital. Amira can't cause a lot of damage because she doesn't have a lot, you know, other people can. And so I would love for readers to look at that. And also, you know, I work with the Domestic Workers National Alliance now, which has been a really nice partnership. And so I do care about domestic workers. I was a nanny for a long time. I would love for readers to walk away thinking, you know, why does Amira have to work so hard and not have health insurance? Like, that is crazy. And what would her life look like now during this pandemic? And what would she do if that was her? So yeah, those are the questions I would love to read.
I love a book that wants to leave the reader with questions rather than answers. I feel like that's usually. What about you, Angie?
I mean, I think, and I was hoping that Kiley would take that question first, because I needed to think about it, because I think it's true. I knew what issues I wanted to explore, but as far as, I don't think that there are, you know, easy pat answers to anything, but some of the things that I definitely wanted to explore are sort of the relativity of positions with respect to these relationships. Kiley, I was so excited to hear, this is like, you know, from 30 minutes ago, but you talking about the triangular, the 3-person relationships. I think that happens so much. And that happens in my novel with like daughter, an only child, which I am, and you know, the mom and dad, and sort of the way that you play off of that, and the way that you can sort of manipulate and form alliances, and sort of the relativity of the positioning. So even when you think about sort of the hierarchy, what my characters debate a lot about the hierarchy of these disabilities. Like you think,
Yeah.
Oh, you have it so much easier than I do because your child is nonverbal, but at least he can walk and talk or not talk. At least he can walk and he doesn't need a feeding tube. Whereas my daughter has, needs all of that. But then, then we have a scene where a uh, a girl is doing fecal smearing inside her room, and so the mom has to spend 5 hours every single day cleaning up literal shit. Like how is that compare? And so it's all of these positioning against each other and sort of thinking about what is better versus what is better, and do you have more power than I do, but then how that switches as the relationships switch. Another one like that is that I think I throw out there, and none of the characters even have any really, they question it, but they don't really have any concrete thoughts about, are sort of when you have a relationship, a romantic relationship or a marriage between a white man and an Asian woman, and sort of the so-called Asian fetish. And where does that come out? So there's, a lot of that kind of thinking, and sort of the way that people talk about these types of issues, but I don't think that I come out with any actual answers on all of these questions.
Yeah, you leave it
But
for
it's a great question to ask, Dantiel. Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought about, I'm not going to ask a question about that. I have a different question in mind, but I did note the instances in both of your books where, a white person was using their proximity to a minority to kind of like, as a shield, kind of be like, hey, I'm good. It's all right. This is my best friend, or this is my wife, or, whatever it is. Like in the case of Matt with his wife, Janine, and then obviously Alex with Tamara. So
yeah, like I can't be racist because I'm married.
Yeah, I'm married to you.
Yeah, I'm married.
I think Matt verbatim says that in the book in one line. He was like, "Well, she was going to say I was racist, but I'm married to her, so I was."
Yeah, come on.
Yeah. So kind of circling the same kind of thing. I'm really interested in how both of you navigate code switching in your novels. We see it between Amira and Alex. Obviously, she's one way at work, and another way with her girls, and we see it with the way the U's have to function as immigrants in America. There's a line in your book, Angie, where you say, Pac was a different person in Korean versus English. So my question is, do you think this need to change who you are based on audience has a long-term effect on a person's sense of belonging to themselves? You know what I mean? Like, you have to do it. You feel like you have to do it for work, to get hired, to get that job, to keep that job, whatever it is. But like, what about a person's sense of belonging to themselves?
I mean, I definitely think so. That's one of these issues that I think I have heard the most from when I, do book clubs or events or whatever. A lot of times people will write me or come up to me and say, that's something that I feel that just goes to your fundamental view of yourself as a person. So, like for example, when you switch languages, and sort of even just the sense of competence that you have in the ability to express yourself, that's so fundamental to who you are. That not only changes the way that you relate sort of as a person in society and your sense of confidence and competence and all of those things, but also it also changes the way that you relate even to your children. So like so many immigrants will come to this country, and then all of a sudden, the 5-year-old can speak English better than the parents. And so you end up taking the 5-year-old to the DMV with you and asking the 5-year-old kid to please translate what they're saying to you. And what that does is it just destroys not only your sense of self, but also makes you switch positions. And so the 5-year-old becomes the adult, right? And becomes the caretaker. And, so then, it's all the sort of social constructs that we have are completely changed and, no longer make any sense. And so that kind of thing obviously happens with immigration, but it also happens with, when you are a parent versus, parent especially of a special needs person versus, somebody who's at work without having to deal with that, or even parent of a special needs child versus parent of the sibling who is more typical. All of those types of things, I think, really affect the way that you identify yourself to yourself, which I think is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think code switching in all of its forms is really interesting to me. I was excited to explore that. There's a character named Tamara in my novel, and she does a lot of code switching. She's a very elite bourgeoisie Black woman who is a principal in Manhattan. And it's my personal belief that some of the most cringeworthy, forced code switching is from Black elite trying to be down. And so
I have some questions for you about Tamara.
My favorite thing to dive into in writing with code switching is not just the way people speak, but for Amira, she puts on a white polo every day because Alex has given her that so she doesn't get her clothes messy, and that's who she is when she's working. And then the night at the grocery store, she's babysitting, so she's in her party clothes, but she has to try and be somebody else at that same moment. And she also calls Alex Mrs. Chamberlain, even though she's told you're not supposed to call me that. And I think that does affect how you see yourself and how you switch from your party mode to your friend mode to your work mode. I can tell you that when I was a nanny, I was 23 at the time, and I was a nanny for a family for 4 years, and they felt like family to me. The little girl and I, she was 3 or 4 at the time, and we would do this thing where we would have pillow fights sometimes. It was fun, it was safe, and we would play, and I would say, "Come on, girl, what you got? Let's go, let's see it, what you got?" And it was just fun. We're at a play date, and I hear her playing with her friends, and she's going, "What you got? Come on, what you got?" And it's funny to me now. At the time, I was terrified that her parents would hear her talking like that and then not be okay with that.
Be upset about it.
Exactly. And it's I was afraid of her parents not being okay with me at my best. When I am just playing with your kid, we're being safe, we're having fun. The fact that I'm nervous about that, I think that does change what you think about yourself. When you're afraid to show all of those sides, or feel like you let too much out at the time that you shouldn't, it does something to you as a worker. When you feel comfortable, that's when you perform your best. And when you have those little boundary trip ups, I think it does something to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Really,
and
yeah.
There's something about the relationship with a child that makes it, hard to sort of put up those barriers. So you are sort of
to be fake.
You can't be. It's that authenticity comes through because children are so authentic.
They're themselves. They haven't learned yet to hide themselves to to appear certain ways for the public eye. So we're doing really good on time. So in a little bit, I'm going to pivot to audience questions. So if you have a question that you want to ask, please drop it in the Q&A so we can get your question asked. But so another question from me: to be a writer often means to work in obscurity, but both of your books have definitely made waves in the world. So how are you navigating your literary success? Just super curious. It's usually who's heard of that person? What? They wrote a book, but it's not the case here.
Oh, I don't even know. I mean,
there you go.
So in so many ways right now, transitioning to pandemic living, I was used to writing at home. And so right now everything feels a little bit surreal. And it just feels kind of regular until I put makeup on at 8:30 or whatever to come talk to really lovely people like you sometimes. I think that in some ways you remember how art operates. I've been so pleased that people have gravitated towards my novel in a wonderful way, that there's some weird thing that you feel when other people like the same things that you do, these tiny domestic petty awkward moments, you feel I'm not crazy, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Wonderful. But I think you also have to realize sometimes that people come to your art with everything that they've just done. And, no matter what you do, some people are going to say, oh, I really wanted this to be more Black and I wanted it to be more like The Hate U Give. Like, well, I didn't write that book. Angie told me.
Right.
Exactly. She wrote that book. It's good. You can go check it out.
There's always going to be people, everyone picks up a book for a different reason. And, some people pick up a book because they want to see people reflected in the best person that they are, and they don't want to see inside of a person and all those mistakes and embarrassing things. And that's totally fine. I'm probably not your person. And so in a really good way, I think it's helped me learn and grow what art does. And it sounds very cheesy, but just to be true to what your art does. And that's it. So yeah, so far, so good.
Yeah, that was a very but true. Sometimes the cheesy things are true. So
yeah.
What about you, Angie?
Well, I mean, it's funny because I'm really grateful to do events like this where I can connect with readers and other authors. That's actually probably been my favorite part, is going around to the book festivals where I've been able, just because I don't have, we were talking before the event started, I don't have an MFA and I am new to the writing world. So it's really wonderful for me to sort of meet other authors and writers and sort of talk about that kind of stuff. And what's been interesting about this book is that because it's my first book, I sort of had this expectation that this wasn't actually going to be a real book. So the challenge that I'm actually finding now is turning to my second book, now that I sort of feel like, okay, that one's probably gonna end up being, hopefully, a real book. And sort of the expectations that you bring into it are actually different, and I think are sort of stressing me out a lot more. And so I think you guys all appreciate this as writers. When I was writing Miracle Creek, I actually had this Word file that I would open up every day, and it was all caps. The title was "This is not a novel," in all caps. And I was like, this is not a novel. This is not a real thing. This is just a thing that this is my practice novel that I'm just gonna practice, yeah, and then I will put it away, and then it's just gonna be in my drawer, and then the next novel that I'll write, that'll be the real novel. And so then I was able to sort of write without knowing who set the fire, until I was 2 years into writing the novel. I was able to write 7 different POV characters without worrying oh, is this too many? Probably. That kind of thing. And so in one sense, it's been amazing, being able to connect with the readers and getting, to see the reception, especially from parents of, special needs kids, and especially from immigrant families and things like that. And to hear that it's resonated with them is just amazing. But at the same time, it is making me freak out a little bit as far as actually writing the next thing is concerned. So if anybody out there, if you guys have any advice on that score, I would love to hear it.
Drop them in the Q&A.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Love these answers. I feel like I love being able to actually talk directly to an author. I have a question, let's see what it is. And then, maybe getting another question back, but a deeper question that helps me, maybe formulate my own answer. So that's really good. I have some more questions, but I'm going to move over to audience questions. And if we don't get a lot and we have some time, I have some questions for y'all too.
Right.
Okay, let's see. This one is for Angie. It says, Angie, given your background as an attorney, did they have to edit out law stuff for the regular reader?
Oh, well, I'm not sure who the they is. I definitely had to. So it's funny because I didn't necessarily think that this was going to be, have a lot of courtroom drama type stuff in it. But then it did, when I was thinking about sort of the structure options and things, it did dawn on me, well, I am familiar with that. So my first career was as a litigator, and I loved being in the courtroom. That was probably my only good thing that I actually liked about being a lawyer. And then everything else I hated. So I didn't really last that long in the legal field, but in any case, so I loved being able to revisit the courtroom by writing these courtroom scenes. And I think I found it so fun because as a lawyer, I never really found writing to be difficult, because you're just like writing whatever, especially when I'm writing out like the questions that I'm going to ask witnesses or whatever. That's just, stuff that you just do. And when I started writing, like writing essays and short stories and things like that, I started sort of poring over like every single word, like what's the word choice, what's the rhythm, what's, and I started having writer's block for the first time, and things like that. And so I feel like when I got to the courtroom scenes, I was all of a sudden able to sort of go back into the writing as a lawyer mode rather than writing as a writer mode. And so it became really easy. And so I wrote such long, detailed courtroom scenes, and they were filled with all these technicalities and lots of objections. I loved objecting. So all of that kind of stuff. And I remember my husband, who was like one of my first readers, he was like, I don't think that you need like to object to every single question. And I was like, but honey, these are good attorneys. Of course they're going to object to all of these questions. And he was like, yeah, but it's making that scene so long. So I had to cut out like 80% of all of my courtroom scenes. And then when I got to edits with my editor, she probably did another, like huge cut of let's cut down those courtroom scenes by half again. So I probably
like, really
have
through with it, and they
right?
were like, okay, pull back.
Exactly. So I had to edit a lot of that stuff out, and I did have to make it less of a trial transcript and actually, just like nuggets of stuff in there just to sort of show what it might be like, little nuggets of authenticity rather than having the whole thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kiley, this one is for you. The post-college years can be really challenging to find yourself in your new life. All of the friends had different levels of success. What made you want to explore that?
Yes, a few things. I was extremely interested in how class dynamics work in friendships. And I think in addition to your 20s being really complicated because of things like healthcare, how much, your college prepared you, or if you didn't go to college, what, vacation you're going to have, all of those things are already complicated enough. And then on top of that, I think something really interesting happens, especially for girls like Amira and her friends, where in university, I think universities have a way of seemingly evening out class structures because you're in the same dorms, or you're in the same apartment building, or you're eating at the same places, you're going to the same places. And yeah, you notice that like your friends like might have more like expensive stuff, or might be, a little bit more broke, but it seems like everyone's the same. But you get out of college and that changes real fast. And I don't know about you guys, but there is a period after college where like when friends get engaged and you're so excited, you're going to be a bridesmaid. And then it's like, wait, we're paying what for that?
Yeah. Yes. I was like, don't ask me. I can't.
Where? Yeah. And it's just, wait, what is that? And I remember hearing like, I was a nanny. I have to tell you, Angie, I was a theater major as well. And I was acting for a little bit as well. So like me and all my friends were really broke, but I would hear of friends like making what seemed insane to me, like $60K a year. And I was like, wait, what? Like, how did this happen? And so I think that class solidarity can either hold friends together or really tear them apart if people can't do the same things, or people feel like they're being left behind. And Alex and her girlfriends, they can offer each other job recommendations, and they meet at the same doctor's office, and they have all this capital there. Amira and her friends can help each other with like coat checks, but that's about it.
Yeah.
To show how class works within friendships and all of those complicated things, in addition to like figuring out what you're trying to do with your life. Yeah.
Yes, I very much remember when my friends were like, we're going on vacation, we're going, and I'm like, plane tickets. I'm like, can we?
Yeah. Yeah,
like,
and then you don't feel like you can say
no, you can't. It's like I'm not gonna be the broke one. Like I'm
out.
Exactly, 100.
So, things would always happen where people would pick a restaurant, and I would Google the menu, and I was like, oh my god, that is crazy. okay, just like, I'll order an appetizer, it's fine. And then they would say, okay, our reservation's at 9. I'd be like, PM? Like, what? Like, how are we're just spending a bunch of money and having to,
No.
that was my issue.
Yep. I remember all that.
Yeah.
I remember being like, all right, I'm gonna make this appetizer a meal, and we're gonna have, one.
But then you don't want to be the one who, who's like, oh, so let's try to divide the check. Would you mind? You just can't.
Oh my God,
it's so difficult. It's
evenly.
so awkward. It's so awkward.
It's a mess.
Oh, it's a mess. Yeah.
Okay, another question. So I love both books and have constantly recommended them. How much of the characters are you or people you know?
Ooh, that's a fun one.
I will say mine is not me at all. I think probably from hearing me talk now, Amira is so much cooler than I am. And she also, Amira is a good communicator, but she needs a minute. She needs a minute to get all of her thoughts together. I feel like Amira is someone who, like, I could be a really chill roommate to her. Like, we would stay out of each other's business, but we're very different. And so that was not me. I don't typically write from people that I know. Sometimes things that people say will inspire me a little bit, but it's usually not people that I know. But I will say I babysat a lot of kids, and one of the little girls I babysat for every Saturday for like 3 years, she was obsessed with smelling tea bags. She just did it all the time. It calmed her down. And so I had Briar do that as well. And when I did a book reading at Books Are Magic in New York, she came with her mom. She's like 11 years old, and she's like on her phone, like grown. So it was very cute to see.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Did she read your book? Did she say?
I don't think so. I hope.
Oh, okay. All right.
She needs to get a little older. Yes.
Yeah, you're right. 11. I think for me, for this book, more than probably any I would write, like, just because there are so many strands of my life within this novel. There are 2 characters that are sort of basically me. So there's Mary, who's the Korean teenage daughter, who's basically just, from a biographical, she came to the Baltimore area from Seoul when she was 11, like I did. Her parents sort of worked in the same situation like I did. A lot of the things that she went through are similar to the kinds of things that I've gone through, minus the explosion and fire and murder trial part. But other than that, so there's that. And then one of the moms, the one who's the murder defendant, Elizabeth, she's probably close to me in a lot of the things that I felt, and sort of maybe, and the relationships that I had with the other HBOT, the chamber, the medical experiment chamber parents and things like that. And what was really interesting about, whenever I talk about this with readers and reviewers and interviewers and people, they all point out to me, and I didn't realize this when I was writing it, that those are the 2 characters that I'm most harsh with, that I'm hardest on. So I thought that was really interesting that, like, you do tend to, I think, be hardest on yourself. And I think those are also the 2 characters that I've had the hardest time writing. It was just so difficult, because I think I was, I found, like, Matt, for example, who's not based on anyone I know, it was really easy for me and fun to write, because I felt like I sort of could explore and sort of make up a lot of the things and build his character from, the ground up, and not worry about, like, oh, I wonder if the real version of me would have said a similar thing, that type of thing. And so I'm glad to be away from that in, sort of, the next novel that I'm working on right now a little bit. Yeah.
More freedom to, like, just put whatever you want on the page.
Yeah.
So we have another question. What drove you to focus on the dangers in making assumptions? I find it so relevant to our current image or our current times, but was nonetheless surprised that both of your novels have that thread.
Yeah. I think that a lot of the assumptions in my novel come from something that is one of my favorite things to write about, which is class identifiers. It's very easy to say, oh, there's a Black woman with a white child, and that's what happened. He saw that, and that was it. But there's so much more that goes into a person. There's someone's hair, there's their outfit, there's their shoes, there's their complexion, of Blackness. There's what the child is wearing. There's so many things going on creating what a person sees. And Alex does the same thing. She gathers information from Amira's clothing to her leggings to her perfume, and then she makes assumptions. And I find that those tiny class identifiers have to be so perfect to ring true. On one end, it's like, consumption, I wish it wasn't such a big part of our lives, but as a writer, you have to get it so perfect and right, because I think it creates a really full person. And so for me, I was really interested in class identifiers, and that made me to be interested in the assumptions.
Yeah, and I think this similarly on when it comes to sort of the relationships between parents and sort of the assumptions that you make about each other based on sort of external things, I think can be really interesting to explore, as well as sort of the assumptions that you make about what another person is thinking as a result of the kinds of things that they externally say or do. And sort of making the assumptions that, well, that must and attributing motivations to those that, because we don't see a lot of their what they've been through or their backgrounds or things like that. And that's one of the interesting things I think about throwing together these people who are sort of strangers in this forced intimate situations with this sort of crucible-like setting, and forcing them to sort of get to know each other in a really intense environment. That it does make those assumptions sort of come true and come through in a really, really much more rapid way than you would otherwise. And I think that's what makes it really, really interesting. And also, it's not only the assumptions with each other, but also the assumptions that the reader might be making about some of these characters. And then when you sort of see the scene from, one person's perspective, and then you sort of see the same scene from another's perspective, after having been given more of insight into their interiority during that scene, then you sort of realize, wait, the assumptions that I was making are actually incorrect, and that actually completely changes the meaning of what they were saying. And I think the sort of multiple POV back and forth exposed that as well. So that was 100%. Fun and interesting to explore.
Yeah. Okay, so there's one more question, and it's actually the last one we have time for. And this one is for Kiley. Kiley, did you cringe while writing any of the cringe-worthy scenes or moments, or did you fully enjoy writing them?
I just dive on in. The more cringy, better. I get a little bit clinical when I'm writing scenes like that. So I don't want to say that I'm like devoid of emotion. I do feel things for my characters, but I'm so in it of like what needs to happen. The timing of things is really important, how things are delivered, the build up in that conversation. I feel like it's, you guys get it. It's like a little bit like choreography as you're writing.
Yeah.
All of those pieces so perfect. There isn't much time to cringe, but I have to say, like, that's my favorite thing in a novel, is to feel that. I think, in movies too, I think Parasite had a lot of really cringy.
Oh my God.
I really loved, like, that's my peak. Like, that's where I want to get to as a writer. And I know this is strange. I've never written anything horror filled, but I love horror movies a lot. And I especially I love the first 20 minutes of a horror movie the best, because I think that you watch a lot of glitches and a little like, oh wait, something's like a little tiny bit off, but it's not.
Yeah.
And I feel like I try and maintain that first 20 minutes within my whole novel. And so I did not cringe. I should probably be nicer to my characters. The more awkward, the better for me. So I hope.
And I feel like I'm so happy to hear you say that. I feel like it goes beyond just the cringe-worthy type things. It's, when I'm reading things as a reader, there's so many times, like, when people are like lying to each other or keeping secrets, I just want to bonk them over the head and just talk to each other and just be honest and whatever. But when I was writing those scenes, I was sort of like aware in the back of my mind, like, if I were reading this, I would be so like you know, frustrated right now, but it was so enjoyable. It's so funny how like the same things that can drive you crazy when you're reading them, but you know, when you're actually creating that, because that's what we're trying to do, is create those moments. So I feel it's so fun.
Well, thank you so much for you both being here. I really enjoyed having this conversation with you all. I'm going to turn it back over.
Yeah.
Connor.
Yay.
Hey.